I'm Peter Yo, President of the Better World Campaign, which is a sister organization of the United Nations Foundation. I'm here today with Jared Genser, who is a renowned international human rights lawyer and who has been very successful in helping to free 300 political prisoners in over 20 countries, and is a longtime friend and ally. We're here also to commemorate and celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. How do you pick the cases?
Yeah.
And then once you pick the cases, how do you pursue the cases?
Sure. As you might imagine, I have a lot of people who would like pro bono help, understandably so. I'm looking for a couple different things when I'm identifying possible cases. The first is that the case has to be representative of a set of broader abuses in a country. In addition, I need to be convinced the person is actually innocent of the charges against them and that they've neither used nor advocated violence. And then lastly, I want to kind of understand how the work that my team and I might be able to do will be able to be effective in the country context. And so one has to look at the country you're talking about and what the opportunities might be to engage. And we can combine legal, political, and public relations advocacy efforts to secure their freedom. What I've learned over my career, some 20 years as an international human rights lawyer, is of course it's very difficult to enforce international human rights law. And the way that you do that is by working with the United Nations system, as we'll discuss, but then combining support from the United Nations, with the political and public relations advocacy efforts to have the kind of impact that one needs to have to change the mind of a dictator, that it is no longer worth detaining a person and that they would be better served by letting that person go.
You mentioned that it's not just a one spigot legal approach, but rather there's a public affairs element to it, there's a legal element to it, there's likely a coalition building element to it.
Definitely.
How do you figure out what's going to be the most important strategy to really break your case free?
I mean, each case is unique.
Yeah.
Obviously, the more closely tied to the dictator of a country a person is, in that they're in jail because of the dictator's actual decision, the harder the case actually is to get done. But at the end of the day, what I've learned over my career is that dictators are ruled by one emotion, which is fear, right? Fear of loss of power, fear of justice and accountability, fear of their families or themselves being targeted, with sanctions of various kinds, right? And one has to look at each country's situation specifically in an individual case and understand what are the buttons that you can push to inspire fear in the dictator, right? Because at the end of the day, dictators never release political prisoners because they want to,
or it's the right thing to do,
or that it's the right thing to do.
No.
They do it when they have to, right? And when they have to, is when you've raised the cost substantially high, that releasing the person is the least worst choice they have among a lot of bad choices, right? And so how one comes at that really depends on the individual case. But it is very, very important at the outset to establish that the person is being detained illegally and in violation of international law. One might not think that should matter all that much because these are political cases and not legal cases. But at the end of the day, it actually does matter when you're trying to mobilize a coalition of people, governments, NGOs, and a wide array of others to advocate for a person's freedom.
As we think about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, would any of these special mechanisms, special procedures, would they likely even be in existence if we didn't have the UDHR to begin with?
The UDHR is a very, very unique declaration that was, of course, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, and we're at the 75th anniversary of it. What it said was something quite simple, but also profound overall, which is that every human being is born free in dignity and in rights. And the Universal Declaration, despite simply being a declaration of the UN General Assembly and not technically being binding as a matter of international law, inspired the creation of what are today 9 international human rights treaties that not only cover different topics like civil and political rights or economic, social, and cultural rights, but also sub-areas like the Convention Against Torture. We have the Genocide Convention. We also then have, the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, on people with disabilities, on women's rights. And this whole modern movement of binding human rights law that connects us all as peoples from around the world began with the adoption of the Universal Declaration, which today has been translated into more than 500 500 different languages, and is both at the same time inspirational and aspirational in terms of what it's trying to achieve and what it's trying to say about the universality of humanity and about fundamental human rights being so central to our existence.
You're identifying some very specific, concrete ways in which UDHR has inspired treaties and which ultimately make it easier for you to do your work.
Of course, there's the UN Commission on Human Rights,
Right.
which today is now the UN Human Rights Council. And that council has created and overseen 50 different what are called special procedures. For my work, the most important body of the United Nations is the UN Special Procedure called the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention.
Mr. President, in 2022, the working group adopted a total of 88 opinions concerning 160 persons in 50 countries under its regular procedure.
This is a 5-member expert body. The most important thing that they can do is adjudicate individual cases of arbitrary detention. And the working group meets 3 times a year and adopts legal opinions on these cases if a person is being arbitrarily detained. And they explain in detail why. Being able to say, that it isn't just the opinion of the family or of the person themselves or of their lawyer, that the person is being held illegally. To be able to say the UN has said a person is being held illegally and in violation of international law is a really, really important step forward in any given case, and really opens up the door to a lot more advocacy and publicity. The working group has the ability to render an opinion even if a government has not responded, and
so you can't stonewall it.
They go ahead and do it. Exactly.
Okay.
So either way that happens, but many states have realized that they have no chance of winning.
Right.
If they don't respond, they automatically lose.
They will lose.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, what's important to emphasize is, despite all the challenges that one hears about with the Human Rights Council at a political level, the UN Special Procedure system overall has been insulated from those kinds of disputes across states. And the working group does a really good job.
When you work on a case and it's successful, what is it like?
Yeah. Well, this is what inspired me to become a human rights lawyer in the first place, was to meet former political prisoners and to hear their stories and to understand that, these are the human rights heroes of our time, right? And to stand in solidarity with them is a profound honor and responsibility. It's also enormously difficult, not just for the prisoner themselves, who often is mistreated or even subjected to torture, but for their families, right? For their spouses, for their children, most especially. These can be very brutal cases that go on for years and inflict an enormous amount of emotional pain and suffering that's, of course, intentionally being inflicted upon a person and their family by a dictator. To prevail against all odds, and to see the person walk out of jail is what the work is all about. And it's all about, for me, returning those people to the world as the extraordinary people that they are, so that they can return to their important work. But with the international support that got them out, they have a lot more flexibility and freedom to be able to operate than they might have before. And when a dictator releases a prisoner, while I have had clients go back to jail, again, they often have much more protection because of that international support than they did before they went there. And in other cases, people are forced to go into exile. For example, just earlier this year, I had been representing 2 of the Nicaraguan presidential candidates, Felix Maradiaga and Juan Sebastian Chamorro. They got out in a very dramatic moment when Daniel Ortega, the strongman dictator of Nicaragua, didn't just release them, but 220 other political prisoners who were all flown in a single plane to the United States. And I took, just one illustration, Felix Maradiaga, I was able to bring him to see his family for the first time for 2 years as he met them at Dulles Airport. And to just be there, watching the family reunited, with his daughter Alejandra saying, "Daddy, I can't believe it's you. You're here." I cry in all of these moments, and it's what this work is all about. To be able to reunite families and to be able to return these extraordinary humans back to the world that they should be in, trying as hard as they can to make a better life for the people in their country and for their communities. These moments are extraordinarily special. and one has to savor the victories. And of course, then I get to move on to my next case.
Well, I'm sure you're never short of cases. But, well, Jared, thank you for your leadership, not only in the international human rights space, but also for your advocacy for so many political prisoners and for your success at winning their freedom, reuniting them with their family, and giving them a voice again. It really matters to the global community. So thank you for what you're doing. Really appreciate your continued leadership.